Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of the Valley View. And this week we'll be talking about the big climate change protest, or is that
People's Climate March. Yes.
March on September 21st. And joining me this evening is Laurie Dougherty and Reverend Rick Davis. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's involved and why you got involved with this issue. Maybe that'd be a good approach to take.
Okay, I'll start. I coordinate 350 Salem, Oregon, which is the local chapter of a global climate action organization called 350.org. And 350.org called for a massive presence in New York City on September 21st because the UN is having a climate summit a couple of days after that. And they want people to come and express the fact that we want our leaders, world leaders, local leaders all over the place to get serious about dealing with climate change. And over 1,000 organizations have endorsed this action, and people have started spontaneously organizing activities in their own local areas who can't get to New York, so there will be things all over the world. Actually, there's going to be our 350 chapter has endorsed a regional action in Portland, which will be a march and rally on the 21st at 3 o'clock in Waterfront Park. And Rick will talk about a local activity that his church is going to sponsor.
Yeah. Now, I always like to have people explain what the 350 stands for, because I think a lot of times people don't understand that term. And so it's 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere.
That's right. 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is what scientists have agreed is a fairly safe level that won't increase global warming beyond what we can cope with. We are already about 400. So if you look at the logo for 350.org, on the little middle part of the 3, it shows an arrow going backwards. We have to get back to 350. We're already past it.
And about a little over 100 years ago, it was at the 280 mark.
Yes.
And so this is quite a bit of change that's been going on.
That's correct.
So I'd like to emphasize what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And so, Reverend, you're having a local here in Salem, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about where that's going to be and when and so on.
Okay. On the same day that the People's Climate Summit is taking place in New York City, September the 21st, we want to show support for that and have a gathering at the Echo Earth Ball in Riverfront Park. That's downtown. I don't know if everybody who's listening to the show has seen the Echo Earth Ball, but what a perfect place for us to be aware of the Earth in its totality and our call to be good stewards of the Earth. So it's the gathering is going to be on September 21st, 2 o'clock at the Echo Earth Ball at Riverfront Park. We're billing this, and we're just organizing this really belatedly, but we're calling it a sustainable picnic. So if you want to bring some food, we'll have some music, we'll provide an introduction, there will be an earth prayer, and we're also going to ask that people who come to this will sign a petition which we intend to present to the City Council, asking our City Council to support the U.S. Mayor's Climate Control Agreement, which is based on the 2005 Kyoto Protocol, which was signed by 141 nations. And it would simply call upon Salem to do what almost every other major city in Oregon has done, which is to take this issue seriously, climate change, and to take the steps necessary locally to do what we can to change it, get back below 350, but also to advocate to the state government and the national government to take this issue very seriously. I've been heartsick for a number of years as I've read about climate change, and who can doubt that it's happening, and yet people do doubt that it's happening. The issue has been obfuscated by the fossil fuel industry to such an extent, and it's been politicized to such an extent that we're paralyzed as a society in dealing with this issue. And I've been heartsick that here is the Earth heating up, and we are politically paralyzed and we're not doing anything about it. And I've been heartsick because I have a son. And I want, and that's another focus of our event on the 22nd. We're wanting, on the 21st, we're wanting to draw people's attention to our children and our grandchildren and ask ourselves the question, what are we doing for them? Because they'll be here after we're gone. What will this earth be like? And so when I first heard about the People's Climate Change Summit in New York City, I felt this great sense of finally, a lot of people need to get together and get attention. This promises to be a momentous event in our nation's history, just like Martin Luther King Jr. Descending on the Washington Mall for civil rights. We need a major event to get people's attention and say, this is a serious problem. We need to do something, and we need to put pressure on our political leaders to act. It's just, so I am really passionately in support of us being involved in this and supporting it, and we wanted to support it locally. And fortunately, the 350 organization has taken us under their wing, and they're helping us to publicize this event and organize it. We're working with them, and we'll work with anybody who wants to help sponsor this event. We have no sense of ownership. We just want a gathering by the Echo Earth Ball that day.
And so, the bigger the better.
And so that it's not everybody in Salem going up to Portland. We care here in Salem, too.
Right. And my impression is that there's been some resistance on the city council and actively against saying anything about climate change and going ahead as if things are not changing. But that's my impression. Is that part of what you see too?
I can't speak to that exactly, but I do know that when the coal train issue came up a year or so ago, that the city council was very, very reluctant to engage with that, also among the major cities. So I think our city council needs to be asked pointedly, what are you doing about this, and who's calling the shots here? Why is it that you're not addressing this issue? So, I mean, Salem has not signed on to this, and every other major city except Medford. I noticed Medford's not on there either, but every other major city in Oregon, from Albany to Veronia to Portland and Hillsborough and Ashland, and all these cities have signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Control Agreement, and Salem is not there. And we think that Salem, if we have a representative government, a city council representative of the interests of the citizens, then we, the citizens, want to speak to the city council about this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Laurie, as far as the national organization, the 350.org, they're hoping to get a lot of people into New York City. Mm-hmm. And there's also, I gather there's going to be a fairly large group in Portland and,
we hope so.
And Eugene.
Yeah, we hope so. There's a number of organizations. We went to some planning meetings in Portland, and a lot of different organizations came to that meeting. Faith groups, different activist groups are helping to organize the event in Portland. But what's very interesting in watching the national, situation evolve is the real effort that they're making to be inclusive, to reach out and to people that haven't necessarily aren't environmentalists, that haven't identified as climate activists, working people who sometimes are afraid that their jobs will be lost, and yet they are beginning to realize that their communities are at risk, their livelihoods are at risk from the disruption, climate disruption. Poor and minority communities, like you saw in Katrina and Sandy, when there are huge storms. Not every storm is a climate, storm, but there will be more bad storms, more torrential rain events, more droughts, and marginalized and poor and low-income people are the hardest hit and have the least ability, to come back from those
situations.
So 350 has made a tremendous effort to understand this and to make connections, and more and more in terms of this event, what you hear is the word climate justice. Climate justice. What is on developing countries like Bangladesh and places like that are very much at risk, island nations. They are very sensitive to these issues, and the word climate justice and just transition is all over this event. and it's bringing people in that you wouldn't expect to be there.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people today that just look at the, their day-to-day weather. I mean, like Salem to me has been a lot warmer than most of the years I've lived here. I haven't lived here that long, but I mean, I remember when I first was thinking about moving up here, there was supposedly, on average, about 12 days a year with temperatures over 90. And I'm sure we exceeded that in August. And we've had several other months where it's been quite warm. So people see that going on. We also can look down to California and see that they're in extreme drought. And this has been going on for 3 years. And they have a lot of issues around this because they're very heavily dependent on water from other sources. And so this is going to impact them.
Yeah.
And I think, so what I'm getting at is that I think it's getting harder and harder to deny some of these things.
Sure.
And people are starting to wake up and want to do something about it and push our local and national politicians into actually doing something about it.
That's right. Yeah. There have been a couple of recent big reports that came out that have caused a lot of buzz, and one is the National Climate Assessment, which is issued every 4 years by, it's a process where a number of different agencies in the federal government, NOAA, the EPA, the Defense Department, several of them get together and review, the state of the situation and issue a report that is broken down through topics like, water, oceans, forests, things like that, also by region. And, they have things to say about the Northwest, that one of the things we're looking at is reduced snowpack, which will affect the ability to have water
all throughout the year?
Yeah, all throughout the year. And ocean acidification and rising sea levels on the coast. I mean, there are a number of effects. And agriculture, shifts in agriculture will be affected as things get warmer. The wine country may find that eventually they won't be able to grow their wines here. They'll have to move north or something.
Yeah, and one of the things too with acidification of the oceans is it really affects shellfish.
Oh, yeah.
And now it's starting to affect the fish populations themselves.
Yes.
And this is kind of a real serious, to me it's a real serious situation where, we've kind of overfished and now we're making the situation worse for the environment for them. And that could affect a lot of people.
Oh yeah, yeah, especially
all of us. I mean, it's very frightening when you start hearing about it. I wanted to chime in with a couple of comments, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You were talking about the warmer climate, and that is true in a lot of places. But oftentimes, the choice word is climate change, because in some places it's actually going to be colder. It could be colder. The climate patterns can get disrupted. I was just reading yesterday in the paper about how, because of some melting in Siberia, the Arctic air can come down where it used to not be able to, and we can expect more cold weather in certain parts of the United States. It's just a crazy, unfathomable thing that we're doing to this earth. And you have to ask, why aren't we acting? And from my reading of this issue, there are two things that I think need to be named for why we aren't acting. It's the fossil fuel industry. If people buy into the idea of climate change, they are going to have about $6 trillion of stranded assets under the earth. They want to pump that oil up and make money. And it's sort of like the end of slavery. Imagine the slave owners. They didn't want to give up they're slaves, and it's almost like the fossil fuel industry. They don't want to give up those stranded assets of all that oil and gas underground, but it's a question of our survival.
Well, it is, and one of the things too that you've probably seen is these large craters that have been going on in Siberia. And those are releasing tremendous amounts of methane. And we talk about CO2, but methane's a much bigger problem as far as climate change is concerned. It's much more, it traps more heat than carbon dioxide. And the other thing that you were talking about also, like about how the climate can change, one of the last ice ages was triggered by a freshwater melt in the St. Lawrence tributary that dumped a whole bunch of cold water into the North Atlantic, which basically shut down the Gulf Stream. And if you look at like England and Ireland and some of those places, they are heated by that Gulf Stream. And so when that thing shuts down, they are very far north of where we are even. And so they suffered some really bad climate impact and glaciers because of that, the melting of this huge glacier at the mouth of the St. Lawrence. And right now we're seeing a lot of melt in the North Atlantic again in Greenland. A lot of the glaciers are receding quite rapidly there. So these are things, though, that they're going to impact us, but we need to bring down the temperature, so to speak, so that it's not catastrophic. And a lot of people are, I think, starting to react to that and understand that issue a little bit better. But it seems like the politicians who are supported by a lot of times these groups that you're talking about are very reluctant to follow up on that.
And the another aspect of that is the fossil fuel industry, which has fueled the obfuscation and denialism, and they're able to buy a few scientists who are willing to prostitute their knowledge and say, oh yes, there is some doubt about this climate change thing. There are extreme minority of scientists who are willing to do that.
Less than 3%.
But allied with that, there is a strong anti-government political ideology in our culture, and if climate change is happening, and who can doubt it? I mean, the scientists are telling us, and they have studied this in depth and observed the patterns of the Earth and the climate. They're telling us it's happening. If it's really happening, their whole political ideology is threatened because it's going to require the concerted efforts of governments, international governments, to work together. And if you are against government, if you believe in unbridled capitalism and no type of governmental controls over anything, to admit of global climate change means you're going to have to scrap your political ideology. And so people are clinging on to that tenaciously. And I think that's one of the reasons it's become such a politicized issue, which is so unfortunate, because I can't say the word right now, it paralyzes us, and that's not what we need right now. We need to break that.
Yeah, one of the things too is that, like, if you admit that climate change is going on, it then forces you to do something about it.
Right.
You can't just be on the sidelines anymore and ignore the issue. And I think that's another thing too that goes on with, like, people in their day-to-day lives. They got enough to worry about, so well, we'll let somebody else take care of that. But it's really things that you can do to help. You know, maybe you don't drive your car every day to work. Maybe you bike or walk or try to take public transportation, or you lobby the city council and the other groups to provide public transportation, to make sure that there are alternatives to people driving in their car. Most of the time it's just one person in the car driving to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
My congregation voted on a transportation equity resolution this past spring at our congregational meeting, saying, it's so hard for poor people in particular to get around in this city. They're basically disempowered and disenfranchised and not able to participate in the life that the rest of us who happen to own vehicles do.
Right.
Well, even getting to a job when you don't have public
transportation. On the weekend.
And later on in the evening, because a lot of times shift workers are now not able to get to work or get home from work.
Yeah, I know. This shocked me because I moved here. My daughter has lived here for many years, and when I retired, that's why I moved here, because she's here. But I came from Boston, and I could throw a stone at a trolley, stop where I could, get on the trolley, streetcar, and go in the buses and subways and get all over the area, and that's just kind of shocking to me that we don't even have buses that run on Saturday and Sunday, or even in the evening, as you said. It's a shame.
So, how has your congregation reacted to this, Reverend?
We're on board with it. We're part of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and the Unitarian Universalist Association at their General Assemblies has voiced their concern about climate change for a number of years. And so my congregation is on board collectively. I'm also, as the minister, called upon to ask each one of us to reflect on our own lives in in how we can change our habits, just as you were suggesting. It doesn't make much sense for us to be leading a lifestyle that is exacerbating this problem and then pointing a finger at other people. At the same time, we have to realize that even if all of us individually decide to alter our lifestyles, we still need to work together collectively to do this. But still, I have preached sermons on how the diet that we eat, a lot of meat, eating a lot of meat. I look out at a lot of carnivores on Sunday morning, and I hate to tell them this, but you should stop eating so much meat. I hate to offend anyone, but your consumption of meat is one of the main contributing factors to global climate change because of the way that meat comes to us. And driving around, and we can all look at our own lifestyles and do what we can to reduce our carbon footprint. That's true. And then we need to also advocate for collective action.
You know, it's funny when you mention about diet, because about a year and a half ago I went vegetarian. And the thing that I noticed was that it helped my health. I started feeling better. I had less digestive problems and like that. So sometimes people need to think about, just because you grew up with something doesn't mean it necessarily works for you. I'm just saying it works for me. Other people might not have that same experience. But a lot of times when you make those kind of changes, you can find that it's actually helpful for you. And, you know, it's not as familiar. So, you know, being a vegetarian is definitely something that you have to kind of commit to and think about. But sometimes it helps you in other ways.
Exactly. And the best way to change, at least sometimes, is to stretch into the change. And so we promoted something called Meatless Mondays. We have the Unitarian Universalists had an ethical eating study action issue where we were all asked to look at our lifestyles, and we promoted something which others do too. It's called Meatless Mondays. So at least start with one day.
Right.
One day where you don't have any meat. And then after that, you're going to discover that, you know, there's a lot of great food that doesn't have meat, and I haven't had meat years, and I don't miss it.
Yeah,
meat
and
years.
There's a lot of diet books now that talk about how you can do it and make it interesting.
Right.
And so that's the other part of that. You know, it's not just eating lettuce. You know.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
But there's also the issue of, like, so much of the grains and the things that, you know, we produce go into you know, feeding the
Cattle
animals to produce a pound of meat, where you can feed many more people, you know, just using the, you know, the vegetative material itself, you know, and growing things that way.
I don't quote me on this, folks, but I believe it was 2,500 gallons of water were needed to create 1 pound of beef.
Wow.
Because of all the grains and other things that go into it.
Yeah.
So,
Wow,
I mean,
that's a lot.
it's a horrendous cost to the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
So,
So,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
One of the things, too, is that this needs to be kind of a long-term effort. So I was kind of curious, you know, because like you have some immediate goals to bring attention, but what are some of your longer-term goals as far as getting people to make this change?
Well, I mean, I think what we really need to look at is moving toward a renewable energy economy, because it's basically the energy use, and also land use, deforestation, things like that. I mean, also have a big impact. But we need to look at how our economy can work better, so that we are using cleaner fuels, we're using fuel more efficiently. And one of the things that 350 initiated, that the international organization, was the divestment campaign that you might have heard about, where they're asking, they started on campuses, but they've moved to churches and other institutional investors, asking them to divest from fossil fuels on the basis that it is immoral to profit from the destruction of global warming. But now when you listen to people talk about divestment, more and more they're talking about, okay, so what should we invest in? And they're looking at, you know, what kinds of things would provide decent jobs, but on a cleaner kind of an economy, or a more beneficial,
or a more sustainable
type of
economy.
work. Yes, more sustainable economy. So they're moving, you know, like you start with, you know, like sort of the bad. The fossil fuels are bad, so we don't want to be involved with them, and then to look at, well, what do we want to be involved
Right.
with? And more you hear that of like people talking about how, you know, what kind of lifestyle, more biking, walking. I mean, I walked here, you know, I live about a mile and a half from here, and a lot of times I bike, but I just happened to walk today.
Well, that's even better.
You know,
that's better.
So,
you didn't even have to pay for the bike if you're walking. But you are limited as to how far you can go and like that without the public transportation part. You see, and that's where we need to come together collectively.
In Salem, yes, exactly, that's right.
Right, yeah. It's good to have a vision of a time when we do have renewable energy, that we have more people growing food locally, that our diet improves, that we learn to live simpler. It doesn't mean, we're not talking about some dour asceticism where you're supposed to give up all these wonderful pleasures. I think that, in fact, we've succeeded in making ourselves very unhappy with our lifestyle. We're so isolated from one another. Look at the way we live in our houses, so far apart. And I loved the idea that people are moving into city centers now, and people are learning to take up less space and connect with each other and communicate more, and that we're having, you know, rooftops that actually have grass growing on them, and people growing vegetables and fruits and sharing them, and
in their front yard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, the front.
Yeah, not just the backyard, but in the front yard. And also, I've seen a lot of a lot more people biking and walking these days. But part of the problem is that cars still have priority, and they, like the city here, keeps focusing on how to get traffic through the town, as opposed to making it easier for pedestrians and bicyclists and skateboarders to get around.
Right.
And but see, that's a collective action we can try to enforce on our city representatives, to try to start thinking more in terms of how do we keep things sustainable, as opposed to just going on the way we have been going.
Right.
Yeah, I drive a vehicle, so I don't often have to be in the position of a pedestrian. But sometimes, if you want to cross commercial, you have to walk half a mile for a crossing and then wait for the light to change.
Yeah.
And I have my family hosts the neighborhood night out every year, first Tuesday in August. And it's a revelation to me. You know what we get to do? We get to go down and we get some barricades from the city, and we block off the street, and cars drive up to the barricades, and they're like tyrants would have been knocked off their throne. It's like, I have the right to drive down this street, and we say, no, tonight, this street is for children to play in, and the children run and play hide and seek, and there's all this human activity, and the tyranny of the vehicle is overthrown for one night. And it's just amazing to see the transformation that comes in just one night. And you think, why couldn't we have planned our neighborhoods where the vehicles had to go down little back alleys, and we had all this space for our children to run and play instead of worry about being run over? And
well, we're going to have to end it there. And I want to thank Laurie Dougherty and Reverend Rick Davis for coming and sharing with us. And come back to Valley View next time.